When I was growing up, I was a big fan of a novel called Magician by the fantasy author Raymond E. Feist. It was actually split into two parts, Apprentice and Master. In the first part, a boy named Pug badly wants to be a wizard, but just lacks the raw talent to use magical abilities. He trains under a skilled magician named Culgan, but for whatever reason, he just can't learn to cast spells the way his master tries to teach him. An invading army captures Pug, and he gets hauled off to their capital city where he winds up enslaved. But a noble spots him, notices that he has some magical ability, and ships him off to the Academy, a place for magicians to study the arcane arts from a different point of view. You see, Pug was being trained in what these magicians call the lesser path of magic, by instinct. Their way is what they call the greater path, or magic by knowledge. As the story progresses, Pug becomes a powerful practitioner of the greater path, but as he becomes disillusioned with the politics of his fellow practitioners, his ability to tap into the more instinctual magic allows him to resist their way of life and even surpass them. Pug goes on to become one of the greatest magicians there ever was, one who's not biased to think of magic in terms of lesser or greater paths, but who instead understands that his powers require different pathways and disciplines to access. And I think about Pug's story when I think about the discipline of marketing, because we have our own greater and lesser paths, so to speak, and they're often taught in colleges in two completely different programs. The more instinctual, creative side of marketing tends to be taught through the liberal arts in colleges of communications, and this encompasses topics like advertising, creative art, public relations, and so forth. But the more academic and business-like side of marketing tends to be taught through schools of business, and this encompasses topics like marketing management, strategy, client development, and optimization. Now, I'm not going to call either of these the lesser or the greater path, but what I will say is that both of these sides of the same coin tend to butt heads in the corporate world because they approach marketing from a very different point of view. The creative side of marketing needs to be guided by clear strategy, objectives, and measurements in order to be effective, or else it can become a wishing well of wasted money. And the practical side of marketing needs to be influenced by creative thinking, or else it becomes boring and bland and fails to make a product or brand stand out in a meaningful way. Both sides of the discipline need to be organized around a plan where everyone's on the same page. And I'm going to share one of those types of plans with you today, a framework that comes from the textbook Marketing Management by Philip Kotler, Kevin Lane Keller, and Alexander Chernev. We call it G-STIC, and those letters stand for goals, strategy, tactics, implementation, and controls. I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this is the Marketing Gateway. So when we're talking about a framework like G-STIC, what we really need to begin with is the topic of alignment, which means bringing all the key players in a marketing strategy plan into the fold. Marketing strategy lives or dies by how much the smaller details have been considered and acknowledged, and it's crucial to ensure that multiple perspectives are being heard in the course of developing a plan. I'm also going to take the position that the reasons products and service brands tend to fail is because the type of planning I'm going to outline isn't being done as well as it needs to be. And my experience has been that many marketers spend much more time making upper management pitch decks and preparing updates than they do engaging in strategic planning to give those activities some real backbone. Without a solid plan that articulates what the market is, how this new product or brand is going to serve it, what tactics are going to be used to roll it out, what goals it's going to achieve, and what budget is going to be assigned to it, marketers are doomed to fail in some way. Sometimes this can mean a product or brand never gets off the ground. Sometimes that means a lot of time and money get wasted. Sometimes that means an embarrassing public failure that becomes a case study for how not to do things. Now, I'm not suggesting that using the G-STIC framework guarantees success, but I am going to suggest it will minimize the opportunities for failure. Imagine if you were going to a foreign country on a trip and you didn't bother to do any research or make any real plans ahead of time besides maybe booking your travel and your lodging. When you arrive, you might discover that you came at the wrong time of year to enjoy the activities you want to do, or that you didn't build in enough time for an excursion you were hoping to take, or that you didn't plan ahead for all of the expenses that are required to be a tourist in that specific destination. The chances of your having a bad trip are much higher than they would be if you'd taken the time to do some research and planning ahead of time. And that's really what the G-STIC plan helps you to do. It's a framework that can be used on new or existing brands or products, and it forces you to put a lot of things in writing that you need to know to maximize your chances of success. So let's go through these letters one by one. The G stands for goal, and in a G-STIC plan, that means identifying what you're hoping to achieve with your marketing plan. These can be monetary goals like increasing revenue or growing profits, but they can also be non-monetary goals like building awareness, improving loyalty metrics, or acquiring more market share. Goals are not fuzzy mission statements. They need to be tied to some sort of measurement called a performance benchmark. These can be quantitative, which means that they're expressed in some sort of change in a number like sales growth or market share, but they can also be temporal, which means that there's a deadline by which you want to achieve your goal. So let me offer an example that we can use for each of these 5 letters. So let's say that I'm a brand manager for premium animal crackers that are sold in boxes at the grocery store and in smaller packages sold in vending machines and convenience stores. My goal in using the G-STIC is to increase sales in 2026. By setting my 2025 sales as my benchmark, I can articulate a quantitative goal like I plan to increase sales by 50%, or I can articulate a temporal goal like I want to have this refresh of the brand in place by Q2 of 2026. Can I use both quantitative and temporal goals like I plan to increase sales by 50% by Q4 of 2026? Absolutely. In fact, I'd recommend it if it's feasible to do so. The more specific the goal, the better you'll be able to focus on achieving it. So next, we move on to S, strategy. And the first step of any strategy section is to develop an understanding of your customer, which also means learning more about their needs and how your product or brand can be of help to them. This often means conducting both primary and secondary research. And this is not a task you want to do lightly by pulling some questionable data off the internet or by putting out an email survey that you designed yourself. At the very least, you need to get your hands on some reliable market data, talk to some knowledgeable people, interview some of your customers, and spend some time reviewing recent case studies. I would also recommend budgeting for a competitive intelligence specialist or a research agency to help fill in the gaps from what you can't locate from those sources. You might also consider conducting a market segmentation study or using a tool like a SWOT analysis or a pestle analysis to identify your opportunities as well as your vectors for failure. In our animal crackers example, defining the target market and using research to look for opportunities is really key if I want to grow my brand. I might discover that animal crackers, traditionally thought of as a snack for very young children, have some potential to reach a new target market if they're tied to a popular streaming show about wildlife or if they're reshaped to look like dinosaurs instead of like animals. I might also find that adults are more willing to consider these as a snack item if they're coated in chocolate or peanut butter or drizzled in honey. I'll only know through research and spending time really listening to people's wants and needs, and also by refining my understanding of my target market in the process. Spending a lot of time on the strategy section will really benefit you, and I'd encourage you to build in a minimum amount of time and stay in this section before you move on to the next one. And that next one is T, tactics, the fun part of the plan that many people often want to have a hand in. This is where you get to spell out your marketing mix, your communication strategy, your ad buy and content, your creative ideas, your sales plan, and all of the other fun stuff that most people associate with marketing. If this section is relying on a good goal and strategy, the tactics section actually comes almost naturally, but there are a couple of important points that need to be considered. The first is tying those tactics to the goal and explaining how they're supported by the strategy. So in my animal crackers example, I could spend a lot of money advertising my brand to make it top of mind, but in a mature market with lots of alternatives, what's to stop a store brand or a competitor from positioning their product to look more like mine and take advantage of my spending to boost their brand as well? And what if I do a lot of advertising towards my target market, like let's say maybe it's moms with young children, and I find that I don't budge my numbers at all because I'm already effectively maxed out at my potential. If my goal is to grow my sales and my customers are telling me I need to stand out in some way, my tactics are going to have to reflect that understanding. Then we get to I, implementation, which is most marketers' least favorite part because this is where you articulate a budget, a sales forecast, a timeline, the roles and responsibilities involved, and all of the other nitty-gritty details needed to bring the tactics to fruition. But again, if you take in the time to build the previous 3 sections carefully, this flows very naturally because you already have an idea of what things cost. You know what sort of budget you want to ask for, and you've ideally already done the legwork to figure out which key players need to have a role in your plan to make it a success. The objective of this section is to put it down on paper and to communicate as much detail as possible to anyone who's interested in understanding why they ought to allocate resources to your plan. Being able to communicate your return on investment, or ROI, is particularly key here because if you're asking for a multi-million-dollar investment to generate something you can't articulate in terms of ROI, you probably should reconsider your plan. ROI doesn't always have to be monetary. Your plan could be about trying to build awareness or impressions or trials or any number of other activities, but you should be able to articulate how those increases translate to revenue. You also need to ensure your numbers are feasible. So let's say our goal with the Animal Crackers brand is to generate $1 million in new profits in 2026. And we know from previous data that for every 1% increase in market share, we'll net about $100,000 in new profits. That means we need to increase market share by 10% to hit our goal, a very unrealistic goal unless we found a new high growth opportunity. And even if we're only spending $500,000 to try to achieve that $1 million plan, the numbers are not going to be very convincing to anyone with a good eye for detail. The implementation section works best if it's very detailed and breaks everything down in terms of the resources, personnel, and timing that are needed. But the final section, C, controls, doesn't need to be long or detailed. It just needs to explain how we're going to monitor our success and what our plan B is if we need to adapt to unanticipated changes. Generally, we look at 2 things in the control phase: our KPIs that we're going to keep an eye on throughout the duration of our plan, and then an environmental analysis where we articulate key external monitors in the marketplace. So for my Animal Crackers example, I might monitor KPIs such as order numbers, returns, and sell-through, as well as external factors like snack sales metrics and competitive sales in my own subcategory of Animal Crackers. I might also track things like social media mentions or engagements, but those would need to be tied to my strategy to be of any value because they often are actually just vanity metrics most of the time. Once all of these things are done, we have one more task, and that's writing up an executive summary, a 1 or 2 page summary of a plan that articulates what we're hoping to achieve, why we think it's a good idea, and how we're going to do it, how much it's going to cost, what it's going to return, and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. And that's it. That's the G-STIC plan in a nutshell. And while it's a lot of work, these plans can be anywhere from 500 to 100 printed pages and also require dozens or even hundreds of slides in a comprehensive deck. The result is a clear, understandable, detailed plan that can be debated, scrutinized, revised, and ultimately funded or followed once it's ready for execution. Now, I'm going to be honest and say that in my experience, very few marketers bother with this level of detail, but those same marketers often wonder why business is slow and why products or services or brands that they're expecting to be a big deal turn out not to be once they're unleashed on the market. Some folks spend more time making excuses than they ever do in planning how they're going to make their effort an unqualified success. So now that you're at least aware of what a G-STIC plan is, I encourage you to try it out for yourself and see if you can't turn something ordinary into something special with some care and planning and deep strategic thinking. I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this has been the Marketing Gateway. See you next time. Today's plug is for thinking big. And no, I don't just mean dreaming about what could be. I mean looking at what you have in your life and asking, how could I turn this into something even bigger and better? So often in life, we're accustomed to thinking small and avoiding risks. Why spoil a good enough thing when there's no need to be better, right? But that sort of thinking ultimately leads to things getting outdated and stale. Let me offer an example. There was a time where people used to shave with straight razors. And the potential for those razors to slice open your skin and cause some serious bleeding was pretty high. If you needed to shave, you often had to go find a trusted professional barber to do it for you, or you had to spend some time learning how to very carefully shave on your own. And it was that way for thousands of years. So what do we use to shave today? Well, razors that can only cut you if you really, really try to hurt yourself with them. They're so safe you can leave them laying around and not worry that they might injure someone, And they're so common and inexpensive that you can get just a few razors for a few bucks at almost any store. That didn't happen by accident. Somebody, in this case it was King Camp Gillette and William Nickerson, figured out how to make cheap but high quality safety razors with disposable blades that could be attached to durable handles. The rest was history. We even have a commonly used term today for it in marketing, the razor and blades business model, where we sell the razor handle at a loss and then make a profit on the blades themselves. A group of people thinking big about how shaving could be safer and better changed the way we all do things. And aren't we glad that it did? So don't be afraid to think big. You too may have an idea that doesn't just challenge the status quo, but eventually becomes it.